Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have this next panel talking about transforming the landscape for food rescue, lobbying, and advocacy. And this is such an important piece. We just covered the food as medicine movement and really talked a lot about how advocacy is moving that entire initiative forward, and how a lot of the work that's happening in that space and the outcomes that they're able to do are happening because of what other organizations are doing. And so we are very excited to go ahead and extend that into what we're going to be talking about next, which is really how do we do more of this in the space of food rescue as well. So I'm going to open this up to our amazing panel. Tori, if you want to go ahead and start by introducing yourself and your organization, and then we'll hand it off throughout the team.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Tori, and I'm a food waste policy consultant and attorney. Been working really closely with Nina at the Natural Resources Defense Council, but also kind of putting on my Zero Food Waste Coalition hat here, which when Nina and I kind of present, we'll speak more to kind of that coalition. But excited to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're excited to have you. And Nina, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. And really excited to be here too with all of you today. I'm Nina Sevilla on the food waste team at NRDC, which is environmental advocacy nonprofit, and also one of the founding members of the Zero Food Waste Coalition. So like Tori said, we work closely together on food waste reduction policies, and you'll hear a lot more about that from me later.
Wonderful. And Alyssa, we're excited to have you join us. Great to have you. And if you'd like to tell everybody about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. I'm Alyssa Chaladovsky. I am the CEO of 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero. And I'm excited to be here to talk about advocacy and planning. I have been in this role for about 6 months. Formerly was with United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania as Chief Program Policy Officer. So I'm bringing a lot of what I learned and did at United Way forward into our work at 412, and I'm excited to share that background with this group as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your intros. And audience, as you're listening along, the chat is open for you to go ahead and add any questions that you might have along the way. We'll definitely try to tackle those a little bit more either as we go or towards the end. Nina and Tori, if you want to go ahead, Patrick, if you want to share their deck, and you can go ahead and dive in. We're excited to get started.
Amazing. Thank you. So while we're having the deck get pulled up, as I said earlier, Nina and I were both from the Zero Food Waste Coalition, and through the coalition work that we do a decent amount of lobbying and advocacy for both federal, state, and local policies. So excited to kind of share some of our learnings and some of the resources that the coalition has pulled together for our members, and share them with you all and see if there are ways that you're able to kind of leverage them to advocate for your own priorities or join the priorities that are already kind of ongoing and out there. Next slide, please. So we'll start with a little bit of overview of kind of why are we talking about policy and why is engaging in this process important? And go over a couple of engagement strategies that you can consider using. So as we're kind of talking about some of the different policies, feel free to kind of think about how you as an organization could use one of these strategies in your advocacy. Nina is going to walk you through the coalition and how we engage our members in lobbying and advocacy. And then she'll also kind of walk you through some of the current legislative and administrative activity at the federal level. And then we'll shift and I'll talk to you about state advocacy and walk you through a couple of resources that you can use to kind of determine what your own policy priorities are and start kind of engaging in that advocacy lobbying process. Next slide, please. Yes. Okay. So we wanted to start off with kind of why are we here? Why are we talking about policy? As you probably are already familiar with, policy kind of shapes the landscape that we're all working in, right? So whether that's regulatory, funding, the policy in terms of what people are spending their money on, how they're behaving, all of that is influenced by regulation, by law, federal, state, local level. And so kind of engaging in that process and making sure that your voice is heard and you're sharing what's happening and how it affects your organization is really important, because otherwise legislators, policymakers, administrators have kind of no way of knowing, if they're creating barriers that they don't intend to for the work that you're doing. So as I'm saying, kind of engaging this process, it can help remove some of those barriers that you might be experiencing. It can set up some incentives for the partners you're working with. So if you're in food rescue, it's a great way to kind of get incentives out there for businesses to start donating more. But then it also kind of helps us innovate in this space that we're all working in. Next slide, please. So as we're kind of talking through a number of these different policies, here are a few strategies that, we've at the coalition used, and it's a great, opportunity for you to think about, is one of these engagement strategies right for your organization? So whether that's if you have a coalition of organizations you're working with, maybe a sign-on letter for a particular policy is right for you. Or if you have access to a lot of members in your organization who are individuals, maybe something like a phone campaign or an email campaign would be right. And so we'll speak to a few of these different strategies and how we've used them in our advocacy, but it's something for you to think about too as we're kind of going along. So now I'll hand it over to Nina to speak to the Zero Food Waste Coalition.
Thanks, Tori. So yeah, I'm going to just give a quick overview. So the coalition, our main goal is to influence policy at the local, state, and federal level to ultimately reach the national goal of reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. And to do that, we advocate for policies that address the climate crisis, improve equity, increase access to healthy food, and advance food recovery efforts. We also try to offer a central source of information, resources, and toolkits, and as well working to increase the visibility and diversity and connections between all the groups working in the food waste space. So I know Food Rescue Hero is a member. If you're interested in joining or learning more, our website is zerofoodwastecoalition.org. And next slide. So since launching about a year and a half ago, we now have members, over 200 members across 46 states in Washington, D.C., as shown by this map, which is super exciting. The membership of the coalition ranges from nonprofit, food rescue organizations, food recovery organizations like yourselves, to food businesses, to composting organizations, to upcycling groups, to local governments and academics. And the criteria for joining the coalition is really anyone working to reduce food waste in the United States. And our goal is to just bring a wide range of groups together under a big tent coalition to, better coordinate on policy and advocacy. So next slide. I'm gonna, these next two slides, just talk a little bit about the coalition structure. So the coalition is led by a steering committee comprised of the 4 orgs whose logos are on the screen: WWF, the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, ReFed, and NRDC. And we had we're all large nonprofits. We had been working together previously on a number of different things, and about a year and a half ago decided we should formally create something. So we launched the coalition. And next slide. Then the coalition is made up of a few different working groups. So like I said, there's the steering committee that kind of drives the strategic vision and organization of the coalition. And then we have our members who are invited to join quarterly calls and working groups and provide feedback on policy opportunities and then engage in all the advocacy opportunities. And to organize the work, we've created 2 working groups, one on federal policy and one on state policy. And later in this presentation, you'll kind of hear about the different activities in each working group is focused on. So next slide. And lastly, just wanted to share some highlights of our activities this year. So far in 2024, we've hosted 3 policy workshops, including a Policy 101. We submitted comments to the National Strategy for Reducing Food Loss and Waste and Recycling Organics. We've met with over 80 congressional offices to highlight the importance of reducing food loss and waste, including several sign-on letters to support food loss and waste reduction policies in the Farm Bill, such as the Food Date Labeling Act. And as I mentioned, we now have 232 members across 45 states. So it's been super exciting, and would love for all of you who are not a part of it to join us if you're interested. Next slide. So now I'm going to jump into more details on some food loss and waste federal initiatives. Next. Up top, we just wanted to highlight a few ways to engage in federal food loss and waste policy. So I've split this up between legislation and the administration. We didn't have time to show a Schoolhouse Rock video, but if you'll recall, there are 3 branches of government, and we try to engage with all of them. So on the legislative or congressional side, a couple ways that you all can start getting involved are to meet with and educate your senators and representatives. We'd also suggest reviewing some of the resources and existing policies that we'll bring up today, and then build or join coalitions to support legislation that you think is helpful for your organizations. And then you could demonstrate support by doing things like writing an op-ed or phone banking or joining sign-on letters. And then to engage with the executive branch or the administration, as well as federal agencies, we suggest you could identify and participate in engagement opportunities such as public comment periods and administrative meetings. So agencies like the EPA or USDA, who run a lot of programs that you all probably engage with, sometimes if they change their rules or different things about those programs, they'll open a public comment period. And that is a great way to submit or share your experience and any suggestions you have for improving these programs. And then just continue to identify engagement opportunities. And then another way is to apply for federal grant funding. So next slide. So now I'm going to move into talking about some of the top food loss and waste related bills that the coalition is tracking and that we think might be of interest to your organizations as well. So starting with the Farm Bill, which is the big one, it is the bill that authorizes the U.S. Department of Agriculture and most food-related programs. It is supposed to happen every 5 years. The last Farm Bill we had was passed in 2018, which means in 2023 there was supposed to be a new one. And in leading up to that, the coalition released a report on ways the Farm Bill could reduce food loss and waste. However, due to a number of factors, we have not passed a new Farm Bill yet, and we don't think there's going to be one until after the election and maybe even next year. So the coalition still believes that this is one of the largest opportunities to engage, which is why we've put a lot of time and effort into it, but it has been longer than we expected. So this slide is just to show kind of some basics about the Farm Bill. It is a multi-billion-dollar package of legislation, over $300 billion. The majority of it is this green in the chart as this green slice that is for nutrition programs, mostly SNAP. And then the Farm Bill also covers things like crop insurance, commodities, conservation programs, but those are, as you can see in the graph, just about a quarter of it. And the way the Farm Bill gets passed is that the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees will each draw up a bill, and then they will conference those bills and then reconcile any differences between the bills. So there are multiple points to engage. And where we are right now is that the House has a Farm Bill draft, but the Senate does not. So we're still like I mentioned, pretty early on in the process, and things have been going much slower than we were hoping for. So next slide. So like I mentioned, the coalition has published this report around opportunities to reduce food waste in the Farm Bill. And we pulled out our 4 top priorities or recommendations. And this is what we've been mostly advocating around for the past year and a half. The priorities are to create an Office of Food Loss and Waste within USDA. And we believe this will just help better coordinate work within USDA and then across different agencies. The second priority is to increase funding for planning and infrastructure that reduces food waste and enhances food recovery. And we believe funding is one of the main things that the federal government can offer. And then thirdly, kind of relatedly, we'd love to see more research around food waste prevention, upcycling, and recycling solutions. And then lastly, standardizing and clarifying food date labels. Next slide. So handily, our 4 priorities have been incorporated into 2 marker bills. And a marker bill is a bill that's introduced with the intention of being included in a larger package of legislation. So it's a way to demonstrate support for a specific program, perhaps, that then ultimately will get included in a larger package like the Farm Bill. So if you go to the next slide, the first marker bill is called the No Time to Waste Act. And this is bipartisan in the House and the Senate, and covers the first 3 of the priorities I had outlined. So it strengthens federal agency coordination and would establish an Office of Food Loss and Waste within USDA. It fosters a food loss and waste prevention and reduction environment in the US by supporting public-private partnerships, strengthening current USDA research programs, and providing support to states to assist local food recovery infrastructure and coordination efforts. And then it would also launch a public awareness and education campaign. And meanwhile, the USDA and EPA have also been taking action on this, which has been super exciting. So the No Time to Waste Act marker bill was bipartisan. It has several co-sponsors, and several of the provisions of the No Time to Waste Act were included in the House draft of the Farm Bill, which was super exciting to see. But like I said, since the Farm Bill isn't moving, we haven't seen a lot of action on some of these specific priorities. But our hope is that these would be included in a Farm Bill. Next slide. And the next bill that we are advocating for is the Food Date Labeling Act, which gets at those expiration dates or sell-by, or all of those different things that cause so much confusion. And it's not currently regulated at the federal level, and we believe it should be. So this act would say if a manufacturer decides to put a date label on their product, it needs to use one of 2 phrases. The first being best if used by to indicate peak quality, or use by to indicate when that product should be discarded for food safety. And this bill this 2 date labeling scheme has been endorsed by several industry groups. And California actually just passed a bill that requires this similar 2-phrased scheme. So we are hopeful that with the industry in California movement and activity, that will put pressure on the federal level to actually take action and make this happen. Another thing that I just want to highlight from this act is that it would explicitly allow for donation of food past the quality date. I know right now states have different laws about this, but we think that this would help food recovery efforts by making it clear that food is still good to eat, even if it's past a quality date. So this bill is actually, we didn't see it included in the House Farm Bill draft, but we think that there could be an opportunity for it to be included in a potential end of year package that might happen after the election. And so we're trying to keep it open and flexible, because this bill, we think, is pretty common sense. So it's another one that, if you're excited about date labels, I think this is another great opportunity to engage your representatives on. If you go to the next slide. I'm going to run through my last couple slides quickly so Tori has plenty of time to talk about some of our other resources. But I just wanted to highlight a couple other bills that we think might be of interest to the food rescue community. There's two bills that we think will be introduced in the coming year that I think would be great to keep your eye on. So one is the School Food Recovery Act, which would create a USDA grant program to support food recovery projects in K-12 schools. And then the Feeding the Community Act would create a tax credit for people who donate equipment, such as fridges and trucks, to food rescue organizations. So in addition to the tax credit for donating food, we think this, is pretty interesting. So keep your eye out for those two in the coming year. And then I just wanted to share a resource about other federal legislation that is related to food rescue and food recovery through the Food Research and Action Center. And they have a page on their website called Bills We Are Supporting, which is a really comprehensive list of a ton of other federal legislation that addresses SNAP and school and after school meals and some of those root causes like housing and healthcare. So encourage you all to take a look at them too. And next slide. And lastly, I just wanted to also mention engagement with federal agencies such as USDA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and then the Food and Drug Administration, who all have different programs and regulations on our food supply. So two things that these agencies have done in the past couple of years is release some national strategies. Hopefully you all saw in 2022 the National Strategy on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, and there was a number of things that the Biden-Harris administration and the federal government committed to on addressing hunger and nutrition in our country. And then this June, the agencies also released a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics, which also has a number of other actions and commitments that the agencies are going to do to reduce food loss and waste. And of course, food rescue and recovery is a part of that. So the coalition is going to be tracking and helping to implement some of the actions listed in these strategies. And I'd also encourage you all to take a look at the strategies too and see what your organizations could do to help implement them. I know, for example, there's a monthly call, I think, on the hunger, health, and nutrition strategy. So if y'all are interested, I think that is another potential way to get involved. And so with that, I will pass it back to Tori.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to pivot to quickly talk about a couple of state resources for you. As Nina mentioned at the top of the federal section, the way that we engage in a lot of this policy, so in the policies and the marker bills and farm bill and all that she mentioned, is really just meeting with senators and representatives at the federal level to educate them, because there's a lot of they have a million things that they're working on. They can't possibly be an expert in everything and know kind of how one policy here is going to impact something else down the line. And so being able to educate them and share, kind of your expertise is what it's all about. And so it's the same, it really mirrors at the state level as well. So when we talk about kind of state food loss and waste policy, the actions that we think are great for you to take are to meet with not only your representatives, right, like in your district, but meet with the representatives that have an interest in environmental policy, food system policy, hunger, nutrition, and educate them about kind of some of the policies that you find to be important. And so I'll go over a few resources that will help you identify, policies that make sense for you. and, help you structure ways to engage. So next slide, please. So the first is the state legislative toolkit. And this toolkit is a great resource for you to find out, if there are already some policies out there that can help you address any of the barriers or issues that you're facing. And what it does, it provides a lot of background information about the top food loss and waste policies that we've seen in other states. So for example, if, one of the things that's a barrier for your organization is that donors don't have a tax incentive to donate their food, you can look for other states that do have tax incentives, and how could you structure something like that so that you can bring that information with you to meetings with legislators or other partners in the state for you to kind of build a coalition around. Next slide, please. And so the next resource I have is a state legislative bill tracker. And what this tracker does is it has pulled legislation from all the different states according to different categories, right? So something like an organic waste ban, you would see if there's any policies in the state that you live in, they'd all be kind of there to give you information about, who's supporting it, which members of the House or senators are supportive of it. And you can go to the bill page and you can find, oh, here are the other organizations who have come out in public support that can help you give an idea of, these are the organizations that I'm aligned with and I should try and work with. And it's also a great way for you to identify, if say in the toolkit you found something that's really great for you, but you're not seeing it in the bill tracker, like there's nothing in your state that has been introduced yet, you can look at other states that do have that type of policy to see, oh, this is how they kind of structure that in a piece of legislation. Here's kind of the trends that we see for something like a tax incentive to help you as a resource to build out your own policy around it. And then the last thing it does too is, outside of your own policy that you're interested in pushing, it's a great way for you to kind of familiarize yourself with what are the policy discussions that are already ongoing out there. And maybe rather than starting my own thing, I'm able to kind of join a movement that's already has momentum and support. Next slide, please. And also say, we'll share our email and you're welcome to either email us for links to these resources. We'll have them linked in the deck too if this gets shared. So the last resource I want to share is a climate action planning tracker. And so this is a great way to get involved in a policy that's already underway. So all the states that are here in yellow have received funding from the EPA, so the federal EPA, to do climate action planning. And they have to submit their finalized climate action plans by December of next year. And one of the things that they have to include in that climate action plan is waste management planning. And so there's a great opportunity there to say food loss and waste is a part of waste management planning. Prevention's number one, food rescue is number two. Here's the way that you could support organizations on the ground like yourselves. In your climate action plan, you can dedicate funding to us because we'll do X, Y, and Z to help our state. And so being involved in that process is a great way for you to get your voice heard with your state administration. And as I mentioned, they're already undertaking this process and they've outlined different ways for you to engage. And the tracker will help you identify kind of what's already going on with climate action planning in your state. And it also outlines, here's how they say exactly we need to engage. And so you can just kind of jump in and start helping. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it from us. We talked a lot about some different federal policies. We talked a lot about different state resources. We hope that you'll be able to, after Alyssa kind of goes and talks about how to turn that into a policy plan, start engaging with them in your state or at the federal level. We also encourage you to join the Zero Food Waste Coalition if you want more resources like the ones I went over, or if you want to be part of kind of the federal engagement process that Nina mentioned. But yeah, thanks. Happy to take questions after.
Absolutely. And remember, we do have that chat open. So feel free, audience, if you have specific questions. We have incredible experts here to answer some of those. I really value that not only have you made it very clear the key things to do, but also that you created these trackers and work together to make it really easy to do things in the process. So, Alyssa, I'd love to go ahead and hand it over to you to talk a little bit more about creating that policy plan and what the next steps are.
Great. Thanks, Victoria and Nina and Tori. Great information. I love it. So I'm going to talk about how organizations can create an advocacy plan that is easy for them to execute, that is right-sized for their organization, and that has board approval so that you can take quick action. So starting off, step one, to define your public policy strategies. So just like Tori and Nina were saying, there's a lot of resources out there where you can find out information about legislation that would have something to do with your own strategies within your organization. So if you have a strategic plan that might identify your mission and some of the things that you want to accomplish within a year or two, those are a great starting point for a policy strategy. So thinking about the Zero Waste Coalition that we just heard from, but also other places where you can get information. You may already belong to a local food policy council, Hunger Action Coalition or network, reaching out even to your local food bank to see what they are advocating around, and can you team up with them on some issues and learn from them, or there's things that you're doing that you want to share as well with their coalition. And then the Food Research and Action Center as well, that was mentioned earlier, is another great place where you can get information. So once you start putting that together and developing your policy agenda and what I'd like to call the critical path. So thinking about your roadmap, and a roadmap could be a year to 3 years, even longer. So it might be an issue or a policy that you want to see happen, but it's going to take some time. And then the critical path is different in that that's your annual plan. So your roadmap kind of gives you that long-term strategy and goals. And then that critical path is more of your short term. So it's very helpful to break it up in that way because things change. So you may one year get really far down the line with a policy or legislation, and then it kind of gets hung up, such as the Farm Bill that we just talked about. So while you're working on that, other things may pop up that you want to be part of. So that critical path really allows more flexibility year to year. I'll just give an example from my world at United Way. Our United Way funded the 211 call center, and we had a fairly large call center in the Pittsburgh area. And we were putting a lot of resources in it ourselves, raising money for it. But we had a small grant from the state of Pennsylvania. And every year we asked for more. And we had, the reasons why, to build capacity, to be able to serve more people, and all of the information that went into that. So that was a piece of our critical path year to year. And we would see a little bit of headway one year and maybe not the following year. And then step 3 is thinking about how to engage your community. So creating those materials, your policy agenda, once you have it set, you want to be able to share it out to your volunteers, your constituents. And so that, and maybe in a newsletter, social media post, something where you can really say, this is what we're digging into and here's why. And then keeping up with any data that's coming out and being able to use that to help tell the story. So next slide. Second step, and this is one of the things that I've worked through in the past and that we'll be doing with our 412 Food Rescue Board coming up, but really establishing how a policy action can happen. So a lot of these things happen really quickly, so you want to be able to respond in the moment. And so if you provide annually that roadmap to your board along with your critical path, and get their approval. Like, here's the things our organization is going to work on this year. And these are the different ways that we might dig in. We might be signing letters of support along with other coalitions. We may be writing letters of support for other groups, or asked to sign on to legislation. So every time you're asked to sign on to legislation, it can hang up the process if you have to go and have board approval for that specifically. So what I found in the past that made it a lot easier is like, here's the things we're going to work on, so that the board also is never surprised when they see your name out there, like, oh, here's, 412 Food Rescue advocating around this, and the board is not aware of it. So you also don't want that to happen. So it's good to kind of put these two plans together, your roadmap and your critical path, and annually take that to your board of directors, explain the whys and the hows and the ways you're going to connect, and then also seek, their advice, their connections. They may know some legislators who can help you with that. Next slide. So then execution of your public policy plan, it would be the next step. And so when you're thinking about how to engage, I've found that staff is a great place to start. Our staffs are very well attuned into the issues around food waste and environmental and hunger and all the things that we're working on within our organizations. And they also have a great knowledge base of who to turn to, who else is working in the field, and they're great advocates for the organization. So thinking about the 1 to 2 issues that might be important is a place to start. So it doesn't have to be, your critical path doesn't have to be 10 things. Usually in the past, I've had 4, and really 2 top ones. So thinking about, where we can really make headway on those couple of issues. And then identifying, again, some of those organizations that are in the same space with similar goals, because, sometimes we all have limited resources. And when you team up together with other organizations, it's powerful. Like Tori and Nina talked about the zero waste and those 4 organizations that are really, heading that up and moving it along. So, having that, so you're not out there solo talking about something, but you really have kind of a team environment. And then thinking about your critical path, again, is the timeline for each of the goals, and then the actions that might happen. Like in the instance that I mentioned around 211, we would wait for the governor every year to release, in our case, Pennsylvania, it's always been a him, release his budget, and then we can react. Was 211 funded in the budget or not? And then if it wasn't, which wasn't always at the level that we wanted, then we could start taking action and increase public awareness. Something around 211, around food insecurity, all of those things that are well-known issues in the community. And so you can often really rally people around those topics. And again, kind of going back to the board, is once you start out, talking in the community, they can also be the ones that are coming with you to legislative meetings, are introducing you to other people that they might know because they understand the issues because you've presented it to them. Next slide. So some actionable ideas, first off, understanding that this is like playing the long game. That's my one sports analogy, I think. And understanding and accepting that it is slow going, sometimes disheartening. And I think we all have examples of that in our world. But finding your champions, those legislatives, their chiefs of staff, agency and department heads and staff who you can rely on for information, that you can provide information, that you can connect with on a deeper level, and not just when you need something. I think that's the other thing. It's all about relationships, is when you establish yourself as a thought leader on an issue, like, hey, if something comes up around food waste, we're the people to turn to. We can give you the data, we can give you the reasons, we can give you the stories behind what is happening in this world. So you don't always want to be approaching them. And this is, all relationships when you need something. So it's good to have those relationships and those doors that are open, and they know that you also come, with a larger group of people. It's not just your own issue, that it has repercussions across the community. And then paying attention to the timing, again, watching for when county puts out its budget, when the state puts out its budget, when the federal government puts out the budget. That really is kind of your flag, like this is an important issue because it's in the budget, or it didn't make the budget, or it wasn't as much as we had wanted to have in the budget. So it's really good place to start. And then really understanding once a budget is passed, it doesn't mean the money's flowing, that there's a whole other process that goes behind that. And that sometimes there's other opportunities, comment periods on certain legislation or policies or programs that state or county government or federal government might open up a comment period. And it's great just to get your name in there. We did that recently with the Medicaid waiver in Pennsylvania. We put in some comments from 412 Food Rescue because we thought, we want to be in this space. We want people to know we're in the space as well. Oftentimes there's days on the Hill. So when a whole coalition might go either in the state or the federal level, and it's a really great time to interact with your own local legislators, but then also meet people across the country or the state who are sharing the same issues. And any local rallies that you might have, celebrating the wins, because there are wins, and really reflecting on what it took to get to that point and sharing out, thank you to any of the legislators that helped you, and then also all of the coalition partners or others who are wanting to be part of this policies and programs. And then again, just keeping in touch, sharing newsletters, events, invitations with your local legislators, because oftentimes constituents are calling them and asking for information. Where do I get food? Where can I find food? What is the implications of the landfills? All kinds of questions come to legislative offices. And if they have somewhere they can refer a caller, that makes them happy, makes them feel like they have a support system. So, next slide. And so again, some action steps, discussing and defining your policy agenda, building that framework with your board and staff so that everyone understands it before you start, and the local legislators having your list, knowing who's on what committees, what are their issues of interest, who is connected to whom, and then also a lot of times, like the local parties will have a caucus around a certain issue. So you might want to find out if there's a caucus around environmental issues or food waste or things that they're discussing on those levels. And doing those outreach to government officials. What I found always helpful is when we did finalize our critical path every year, we invited legislators for breakfast at our organization and told them what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it, had a story or two about real people who were impacted and why, with that data that we had collected, and kind of really wrapping all of that into a package and telling them upfront, like, here's where we stand on this, and this is why it's important to us and should be important to you as a legislator. So I think that wraps up my piece, and I look forward to any questions that people might have.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really think each of you brought so many really important things to the table. One thing that we often hear from food recovery organizations, because many of them are trying to do a lot with a little, and of course in the world of nonprofit, that's even a regular conversation, right? Which is that there's just resource scarcity. And so oftentimes we think about maybe taking a different perspective, it not being so much about capacity, but definitely more so about prioritization, right? So there's an amazing amount of resources, which I think each organization can definitely dive into from what you all shared. But I wonder just if we could round robin really quickly, if you were to say, what would be maybe the top one or two things that you think from a priority standpoint? And again, it would be very relevant to what they're doing specifically, but many of them maybe 1-2 staff members, right? Like maybe a very limited role, and because they're on the ground so much, oftentimes feeling like I don't have a lot of space and we don't have a dedicated person to maybe drive this forward. So I loved the indication of like, hey, there's trackers. Hey, there's really just looking at what would be the most important thing for us to go after, but I wonder what each of your advice would be. Low resources, high impact.
I'm happy to jump in first, which is, I think a number of the resources that I shared in my state section too, that can really help you build out, kind of a whole plan for yourself if you want to engage in a policy. But if that's too much, and I think that's like very valid, I think it takes a lot of time and energy to be able to identify what is a policy that's going to work for you, meet with all the staffers, draft up legislation, get a coalition to buy in. If that's too much for your organization to be able to jump into, I'd say number one thing to do is take advantage of the coalitions that are already out there doing this work and help amplify the work that they're doing, right? So rather than you being the one who's leading on a new policy and trying to build out the membership of a coalition around something, see if there's a way for you to support something already ongoing. So, there might be a local food policy council who's really involved in legislation in your area. You can attend their meetings and help amplify the work that they're doing. You can join the Zero Food Waste Coalition if you want to, be able to identify sign-on opportunities that you can sign on to without having to actually lead on yourself. So I'd say determine kind of how much time you're able to dedicate to something. If it is really limited, don't feel like you need to be the driver on a new policy just to be able to engage in the space. There's ways to engage that are way less lift by just kind of working with everyone else who's already out there.
Yeah, Tori took exactly what I was going to say. I think that, like Tori said, some of these food policy councils or other coalitions will often have action alerts or send out really easy ways to either sign on to a petition or sign on to this letter in ways that, and the goal is to make it light lift for people, and because we know that all of our members and organizations are doing so much work and very busy in the day to day. So that is one of the coalition's goals, is to make it easy. On top of that, I would also just add that I think another maybe lighter lift way is to voice your support for existing programs such as SNAP or TFAP that already exist and do fund some, like help fund this work. And SNAP, for example, also one of our only social safety net programs that hopefully would keeps people from having to turn to food bank lines. But there's always a battle every farm bill about SNAP funding. And so just plugging into groups like your networks and just voicing support for that, I think, is another lighter lift way too.
Wonderful. Alyssa, do you have some thoughts on that as well? I know you've had to juggle the priority question quite a bit. Yeah.
Right. And I think exactly what Tori and Nina were saying is a lot of this work is out there, and it's just kind of tapping into the resources and the information that are shared in like our local food policy council has a food waste coalition or committee. And so, understanding what the goals are, being part of that so we can kind of drive some of the conversation is helpful too. But yeah, definitely, I think that's why we want to kind of team up with these resources and share them out. So yeah, just say that. And a lot of times there'll be a letter writing campaign that somebody will put together, and that's easy to share out to volunteers, to staff, because everything is already there and people just to put in their name and where they live, and they can change the letter if they want to, but that's just a really great and easy way for people to get involved.
Great. And we did have a question that came in the chat, just really about the tension between prevention and the, of course, goal towards that being the highest goal to decrease how much is coming through the stream, as well as access to hunger relief food procurement, right? Like that food that is there that needs to be. And we talked about some different resources, whether it's SNAP funding, some different things, the waivers, other things that are coming in there. But any thoughts on how to sort of walk through a little bit of the tension that many of these organizations do feel? Because yes, we want to decrease it early on in the stream, but we also want to have access for many individuals who need it.
Yeah, I can start and then others feel free to jump in. But totally, Jim, I think this is a constant tension. And what I would say is that in an ideal world, everyone can afford the food that they need, right? So in an ideal world, we won't need as robust a emergency food network and food recovery because we grow enough food that gets to the people, it's the right amount. But obviously we're not in that world yet. And so I think we need to be working on both ends of meeting the immediate need, but also addressing those root causes at the same time so that we can ultimately get to the world that we want to see. And obviously there's tensions and it's hard. But I think that is the goal, is to, address those root causes of excess food, but also food insecurity, so that we can get to a place where this isn't a problem.
Thank you so much. And I so appreciate all of your expert voices in this and all of the work that everyone's doing, because it's impacting and really extending so many, and how accessible you're making it, both in what you shared at this conference, but also in all the work you're doing for all of us to be able to jump in and kind of ride the coattails of others who are sort of pushing through those doors. So we greatly appreciate it. Thank you all audience members, and we will definitely stay tuned because we have more great workshops coming up as we go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.